reclaiming personal power is how we're going to cross this bridge into the beautiful future. It's whatever comes at us from the field, we learn how to alchemize. We learn how to turn the lessons and the gifts of this beautiful, benevolent life, universe that we're living in, turn whatever it brings into our field into the greatest possible outcome, the most creative possible outcome.
Welcome to the show. Thank you to everyone who has been showing up and supporting India over the past week or two. We'll be sharing more about the situation there and what you can do about it in next week's episode. But for now, you can go to my Instagram at Amisha Gadiali. And if you click the link in the bio, there are lots of different resources for reputable NGOs and groups and media that you can support, donate to, and volunteer within. If you find that this podcast brings something beautiful into your life and you want to step deeper into the community, then you can do this by joining Presence Collective that will evolve into our new membership when we launch our app in the autumn. You can find out more about this if you go to our website and click on Community and Support. We are also accepting larger one-off donations to support with making this community app if this is something that you believe in and you want to make happen. Likewise, please do get in touch if you want to be part of the team organising our in-person wild gathering in the UK this September. We are also currently hiring somebody to come and work with us 2 days a week on the behind the scenes of the community. You need to be happy to do computer stuff, working with all the software and systems behind the scenes to create a beautiful community experience. Email us at connect@thefutureisbeautiful.co if you are interested in finding out more about this. And if you don't already have a copy, please do go and find out about my book, Intuition. You can find out more about it on my website, www.amisha.co.uk/intuition. And from that page there, you can receive a whole gift package if you order the book and just share your receipt of how you got it. You can also find out more about the course that I'll be offering in the very near future called Intuitive Flow, which takes the wisdom of the book into a live learning experience so that you can actually really bring these tools into your life. In the book, I share over 50 practices that help you to support and develop your intuition, along with 9 principles that explain a lot about how the subconscious works and how we can move into living more fully from our intuitive intelligence, even if we have been very rationally mind-driven, which, of course, the whole Western culture, society, and education system develops our brains in that way. We're living at a time where we can actually develop our intuitive intelligence so that these intelligences can work together. And with that, we're activating and bringing in all of this wisdom that each of us are holding inside of us into this world. And so as we do that, we're bringing in more intelligence into this world. And so if you think of it this way, that we all have this dormant intuitive insight, but because most people don't know how to use it, it's currently being wasted. The more of us that actually reform our relationship with our intuition and bring this wisdom out into the world, then the more of this wisdom and intelligence exists in the world. And I believe that it is this intelligence that is going to guide us into how we can creatively solve some of the challenges of this time and how we can find our own way, our own dharma within this whole process. And so please do support this book, Intuition, by buying a copy for your friends, and maybe doing reviews or social media shares if you feel moved to. My guest this week is Diahann Holder, an international soul success and radiance coach, conscious entrepreneur, and spiritual healer, supporting new wave female visionaries, leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs to identify and leverage their unique soul source for positive impact in their lives and professional fields. It was facing a severely debilitating illness that awakened her to the necessity of fully embracing our multidimensionality as women. On a 10-year healing journey that took her around the world, learning and training with a range of esoteric healing modalities, she realized that at the root of her disease was a lack of self-love and appreciation for her unique soul identity and its magic. She now works online, hosting transformational empowerment sessions, programs, and private coaching, alongside in-person retreats and events to awaken the same awareness within the body, minds, and souls of women ready to up-level themselves and the world with unapologetic authenticity and sass. And this conversation isn't just for women, as a lot of what we talk about is actually more general and is useful for everybody. And especially if you are wanting to know what are the secrets of being in a long-term relationship in this time and age. We get to that towards the end of the conversation. Dee shared that she wanted to come and talk about what is possible in a beautiful future and how, as we embody new ways of being, we will experience pushback from the field. We explore the themes of embodied resilience, spiritual bypassing, and flourishing relationships in this conversation called Enveloped in Essence of Gold. We contemplate the question, how do we move towards truthful personal power during times of polarization? I hope that this conversation inspires you to live with deeper intimacy and truth in your relationship with yourself and to those close to you in this life. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Dee, I am delighted to welcome you to The Future is Beautiful. And as I look at your smiling face, I remember my first encounter with you when you came to a day retreat that I'd organized in Hackney many years ago when you were very pregnant at the time. And I just really remember your energy from that day. And then it's been wonderful to meet and weave with you in all the different ways since then.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure. And actually, I didn't realize I was pregnant. Well, I realized I was pregnant then, but I didn't remember that I was pregnant.
Yeah.
So a beautiful visual that you've just reconjured in my mind. It's a very active pregnant lady, I must say. About 75, I could take on the world. So see what happens next time round. But yes, thank you so much.
What does it mean to you, a beautiful future?
Straight in. Love it. It means everything. And the reason that it means everything, that there's an undeniable feeling force inside of me that is invested in a happy ending, whatever that means. For my life, for the civilization of our people, and I feel it. And of course, we don't know where we're headed, technically. But what I do know is that we each have the opportunity to use whatever resources we do to create a future that feels healthy in ourselves, in the cells of our body, that feels healthy on a collective level, that looks healthy on a collective level. When I think about the human, a beautiful future is one where everybody feels comfortable in the duality of being on planet Earth, comfortable journeying between the polarities of light and dark, masculine and feminine. And that comfort comes through understanding that we embody both of these dynamics, and it's safe for us to bring them into unity inside of our bodies. We don't need to be either or. So it's an exploration for me of harmony. That's what a beautiful future looks like. It looks like moving through the spectrum of experience that we're here to have as human beings consciously. When I pan out and from a much higher perspective, the image that I get, the vision that I get is beings who look golden from the inside, and they feel golden, and they feel content in knowing that the challenges and all of the beauty, the gifts are all one. It's all one big expansive experience that we get to navigate. And there's an ease, on some level with that. There's an ease when it comes to the way that we move through life. There's an ease in the way that we overcome obstacles. There's an ease in the way that we look at each other with completely opposing views and understand that both are okay to have. That's what a beautiful future looks and feels like to me. It feels that there's this sense of being comfortable in the mystery, in the not knowing, and a willingness to dive into it and to create this path that we're creating towards this future with courage and trust and this beautiful, compelling, handsome, vivacious vision of what it could be, which is ease and understanding and acceptance of the diversity that this planet will always have, in people, opinions, experiences. But at the crux of it all is love. We're all originating in our actions, in our words, in our expression from the heart.
You mentioned this being able to hold opposing views, and it feels like this is one of the big points of separation at this time, that there's so many kind of diverse perspectives and this notion of like wokeness that's kind of turned into a weapon of sorts, and just so much polarization, this sense that this is right, this is the truth, this is the way forward, and if you don't get this, then you're stupid, and all these narratives that are floating around. How do you find that space of your truth in this time of post-truth and all these different narratives and this polarization? Or how can we move towards a place where we can hold these opposing views in a different kind of way?
I think it's about, really at the core, understanding the nuance of self, understanding, particularly with regards to women and also men, but we're so multidimensional as individuals. We can literally be feeling one thing in 1 minute, and something will switch us out and we'll become a completely different person in the next moment with a completely different viewpoint in some situations. And so the work for me is always to start with you, to start with us as individuals, and to look at the multidimensionality of who we are as beings, and to understand and to embrace that. Because when we don't embrace that, what tends to happen is we start to project when there's parts of ourselves that we're denying because culture, upbringing has told us that those parts of ourselves aren't good enough or unacceptable. We create this split in our expression of self, in our identity, where it becomes like this, a linearity. We develop these linearities in perspective. When we can expand into the fullness of who we are, we get to understand much more deeply the multidimensionality that exists outside of us as well. What we then do is we embody what feels true in the present moment to us right here, right now. And the likelihood is that the experience is not necessarily going to change the perspectives of those people outside of us, but it creates a level of peace. It creates a level of tolerance. And I use that word with caution, because I understand that there's a lot of what we might consider to be intolerable happening in the world. But in understanding the chaos within ourselves and how that creates simultaneously order in our lives, there's so much going on inside, and yet we still manage to kind of function and get things done. Similarly, having that understanding helps us to be curious rather than judgmental when it comes to others' perspective. And I'm not going to sit here and say that there aren't things that infuriate me about the way that people think and the things that people do. Of course not. But I am in a process, and it's been quite eye-opening, particularly over the last year or so, with everything that's blown up in our faces around race and gender inequality and everything to do with the pandemic. What I noticed within myself was a real stepping back from lots of the conversations, because I could feel from within my heart that there was a lot of distortion that was happening. Perhaps it was well-meaning from the perspective of, look, this is clearly unjust. What can we do to bring about justice? But what I found was that we were creating a lot more of a divide between us in certain conversations and narratives and perspectives. My practice is really to tune into what the truth in this here moment right now is. And I understand I have a privilege to be able to do that. And yet I also understand that until we're willing to do that as individuals, not much will change externally.
And have you found that there's a difference in what people ask of you since everything has happened? I mean, I get asked my opinion on all kinds of things, especially yoga related things. Is it okay, Amisha, if I'm doing this, I'm doing that? And I'm like, yes, well, I am the authority of everything to do with yoga because I hail from the lands. It comes from a good place, like that sensitivity. But then, of course, I know that I'm not suddenly an authority on all of these things just because I've got this skin. Of course, there are things that I understand differently because of that perspective. Has it been an interesting one for you with some of that?
Yeah, I think I was very clear from the start in saying, there are people out there that navigate this world way better than I do, from the Black community, who have studied this, who this is their life's work. My perspective and my opinion, and actually it's one of the reasons why I didn't say so much. It was because I understand, or don't fully understand, all of the nuances. So from an intellectual perspective, yes. From an embodied perspective, to a degree, based on the lineage of my ancestors. But culturally sometimes, and in terms of the experiences that I had growing up, no. And I'm willing to be very open and honest about that. What I understand is that there are clear injustices happening in the world that I feel in my body very deeply. I've shared this many times before, but when everything blew up last year with George Floyd, literally 3 days I was grieving, and I had never thought that would ever happen with something like this, but my whole body, and it felt very old grief that was coming. It was guttural. And after a few days, I got to the point where I was like, okay, this has been really necessary. And maybe it's been really necessary for people who have the same lineage as me to be given an opportunity to grieve on such a deep level, maybe in a way that they haven't before. It's like it kind of gave us permission, because part of the resilience that we've built over hundreds of years from having this history has meant that we just carry on, bootstrap, and we carry on. And that's served us to some degree. And also what I'm recognizing is there's a lot of healing that needs to be done, a lot of healing that needs to be done. So when I talk about this externalization of the problem, yes, there is an external problem. And there's also internal challenges that we really need to turn inside of ourselves to look at. There's a lot of wound nurturing that we need to be doing, I believe, as a people. And when we can start there, we have much more resource for the external resistance if there needs to be that. It means that we get to live a much more fulfilling and joyful life when the work is happening. We're doing the inner work, opening up to more beauty, more joy.
Absolutely. I was just with a client this morning and we were having that conversation. I was like, if you could let go of the seriousness of like well, everything's happening in the world, and just come into a place where you allow yourself to feel the joy of being you and let the creativity of being you come in, you can show up in all those places in a different way and with more energy.
Completely. I think so many of us have forgotten that we have this wellspring actually of joy within us. And every now and then like gets triggered and activated. And it's because particularly over the last year or so, I think it's been that part of us has really been oppressed by the situation for many people. When it does explode, it explodes, and it's like this huge polarity there that people are like, wow, it's this huge, like almost uncontrollable expression that's been wanting to come out for so long. It's really funny. Like I notice it in myself, like the laughter is real when it's there. The joy is real when it's there. Part of the work, becoming homework to self, is to remember that there is this, or in my opinion, there is this inherent spring of joy and pleasure and ecstasy that we get to tap into whenever we need. And it's not something that we get when situations outside of ourselves change to suit whatever perspective we have of what joy is. And that is real mastery. The real mastery of the last year, or the teaching of the last year, is how can I still, regardless of everything that's happening, how can I still experience beauty and joy and happiness and pleasure, which are my birthright? How can I still experience freedom, which is who and what I am essentially, despite being, in inverted commas, locked down, despite feeling as though that's been taken away from us? That for me is reclaiming personal power. And that for me is how we're going to cross this bridge into the beautiful future. It's whatever comes at us from the field, we learn how to alchemize. We learn how to turn the lessons and the gifts of this beautiful, benevolent life, universe that we're living in, turn whatever it brings into our field, into the greatest possible outcome, the most creative possible outcome.
Yeah, that is the way of beauty, to be able to be present and to transmute and transform, stay connected to that very sacredness of being alive, no matter what is happening.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? It's hard when
yes.
Those conversations come and people are like, well, what about these people who are oppressed and they literally can't leave their house and they're being abused, and they walk out their house and there's a very real threat that they might be shot, When that narrative comes into the conversation and that reality, it becomes a little harder to talk about personal power. And then someone will throw in Nelson Mandela as this token who said he felt free and was in prison. It is a difficult conversation to have. And yet for those of us in a privileged position, as I'm pretty sure most of the people who might be listening to this podcast are, relatively speaking, I feel it's our duty to create a web of lived experience that demonstrates our freedom. And the more of us that do that, the more we create an energetic field that gets to impact the world. And as I say that, I'm conscious of, the spiritual woo-wooing and the bypassing and that kind of thing. But I'm also very aware that spirit is real. And the universe, for me, is benevolent, is intelligent. Quite often, what I sense, yes, is absolutely spiritual bypassing, and the denial of the human and the human experience. And there's also something called bypassing spirit. And for me, that looks like denying the existence of an intelligence beyond the human mind that may have an impulse towards its own evolution, and this just gets to be a part of it. We are co-creators in that. And so the chaos contains an intelligence.
The car horns beeped when you said co-creators.
Affirmation. Bow, 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 woo! Yeah, sometimes it's the cows moving in the background. It'll be like amen. Like, so yeah, that's that is the challenge. It's one of the biggest challenges, and it's not an easy conversation to have. And I've had people challenge me on that perspective, because of the reality of what's happening in the world. All I feel I can do is to make the most of my privilege, and do what I can to be that hand that extends out to those people that don't have the resource that I have, or don't have access to the resource that I have.
And in this space of resilience, but in a way that recognizes the healing that is necessary, can you share kind of practically what that could look like, and how it's different from like that kind of resilience of just like pushing through, taking the opportunities, there's an energetic difference?
Yeah, there is, absolutely. And one is born from fear, and one is born from having an inspiring and delicious vision of what's possible. The one that's born out of fear, as humans, we're either running away from something bad, or we're moving towards something more beautiful. That first resilience, energetic, that you alluded to is actually survival based. When I think about, family and my ancestors, like, if you weren't strong in your body and your mind and your spirit, you'd be dead. It's a little bit different now. What we get to choose instead is a resilience which is inspired by a compelling future for our children's 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 children, a compelling future for the planet, a compelling future for the species of animals and plants and everything else that exists here. But to have that, we need to build a resilience container within ourselves. The primary way I believe we do that is through self-care, is through self-nurturance, is through turning the gaze towards ourselves and learning how to connect into the inner mother. Because while there is a huge host of support, healers, everything else outside of us, we're so abundant in that these days. Nothing will make a difference until we decide to commit to self-nurturance. And so an inner mother practice, I'm just calling that because that's what it always feels like for me. It feels like this cultivation of an energy within ourselves that takes care of us. That inner mother is one who is fiercely compassionate and fiercely forgiving and fiercely committed to rest and fiercely committed to us eating well. Creating rituals for ourselves, daily rituals, where we're affirming to ourselves that we're enough, we're good enough as we are, that we have the capacity within us, more often than not, to hold ourselves in this moment, that we're connected to the great Mother Earth beneath us, and that we're held by that force. So it's this constant being able to feel safe within one's own body. And that safety really comes from anchoring into all the experiences perhaps that we've ever had of being able to take care of ourselves, of being in really what have felt like impossible situations and coming through the other side, feeling the presence of something within us that is here for our survival, not only our survival, for us to thrive. In offering ourselves that, what we do is we expand like our auric field, we expand our capacity to hold, because all that's happening right now on the planet, it's basic systems theory, really. It's that the complexity of what has emerged can no longer be held by the current capacity that we have as individuals and systems that we've built. So we're having to create something else. So particularly for women, one of the biggest things I'm recognizing is how we really have to expand our capacity through all those mediums, through taking enough rest, through nourishing ourselves, through affirming to ourselves the truth that we are enough, absolutely as we are. And then also leaning into support, leaning into community, leaning into those things that are external to our inner experience, and allowing ourselves to receive. Those to me are the two main ways that we can build this resilience container. Self-care and allowing ourselves to be held by those around us. So creating structures outside of ourselves for our dynamic force of creation to flow through in a way that's sustainable, to flow through in a way where we feel held, loved, supported, nourished by a community. an aligned community.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the global patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation. So I don't know very much about your life, like before I met you that day when you were pregnant. I'm curious to know if you were ever bypassing spirit, or if you always felt really connected, or if there was a big journey that you had to go on in order to feel in the way that you do.
Oh man, I was a big spirit bypasser. I was like, it's all me. I am in control of everything that happens in my life. And in that same conversation, I was also very well practiced at projecting onto things external to me. The conversation around spirit, I've always felt connected to spirit, but I didn't listen always to what will come through. What really catalyzed, I guess, what you call my spiritual journey was at 20 being diagnosed with an illness, and to kind of cut a long story short, recognizing that there was a void within me based on the way that I've been brought up, that was around me only really feeling safe expressing a tiny little bit of part of who I was as an individual soul. And that repression resulted in a dis-ease where my body was repressing itself, right? So it was an autoimmune condition. And as a 20-year-old who was free spirit, really, in many ways, more of a rebel against the oppression, defiance, as opposed to perhaps free spirit.
I know that one well.
You know that one, right? Yeah. I was like, and actually it served me well on some levels, because I was like, there is no way that I want to be on medication my whole life, that I want to go down this route, have this thing done. I just was like, there's got to be something else. And I then went on this huge journey. I did have treatment, allopathic treatment. There was all kinds of other issues. So I left the UK and I traveled throughout my 20s, pretty much like on and off the whole of my 20s, in search of myself, as we do. That took me across the world, studying with different teachers within different lineages of esoteric principles, plant medicine, priestess trainings, like you name it, I did it, literally. Like everything there could possibly be, out there that wasn't about allopathic. Like I did it, I tried it all. And I came through all of that to recognize that we're multidimensional beings, and we're meant to be. We're meant to express all aspects of ourselves, and we're meant to love all aspects of ourselves. We're meant to incorporate and embrace, and that is the nature of true unification. It's the embrace of the totality, with the good, the bad, the ugly. All of it is worthy and valid, and through that we develop self-love. We do absolutely develop self-love. That really rooted me in a passion, having seen the impact that I had on my health, on my life, and my relationships. It anchored me into a passion to share with the world, particularly women, the same possibility that this could also be true for them. Because what I was seeing was a lot of women denying so much beauty within themselves, denying the rhythm of their bodies, denying the rhythm of their cycles, denying fire in favor of the earth or the water. And there was so much denial that I felt like, wow, this is symptomatic of the last 5,000 years. When we break through all of that, this is what's going to take us out from that place of being oppressed.
I've been feeling recently, like with everything that's happening at the moment, and there's all these reports of women's menstrual cycles becoming more intense during the last year or so. There's also reports of the vaccine affecting women's menstrual cycles. I wonder what it would be like to live in a culture where we could really talk about that and understand it, and understand what as women we're doing and what happens through us, and that we could actually use that as legitimate data that shapes culture in the way that that once was. This notion as well of dream circles, where there's an understanding that in all our dreams that there's knowledge, guidance, warnings for our community and culture.
It just sends shivers down my spine, because that to me is a huge part of my beautiful future, where the kinesthetic intelligence is valued as much as the mental intelligence, and both of those worlds get to collide in ways that are transformational. And seeing it happen more and more, bit by bit, science and spirituality, all of it, it's starting to resynthesize in a way that, at least in my lifetime, I haven't seen happen. There are still, as we know, communities of people out there that live this way. It's just us over here a lot of the time in the West that still haven't clicked, or perhaps we have clicked, but we're so deeply entrenched, we're so attached to a system which is inevitably crumbling, to narratives which are dying. We're so afraid of what might be if we decided to actually live in a way which is essentially just an archaic revival, which is a term, the mushrooms guy and psychedelics. Tim Leary uses that term all the time. An archaic revival is required, actually, for where we're headed. And that looks like a reclamation of the wisdom and the practices of the keepers of this planet that came before us, the people of this planet that came before us, who knew exactly how to work with the natures within and without our own beings. And I feel hopeful. I know it's a controversial word, but I absolutely feel hopeful that this is starting to happen, and that more women are becoming aware of the wisdom of our body. And that's what it takes. It takes each woman becoming more aware of the wisdom of our bodies, and that ripples out into the immediate family, the nuclear family, and then beyond. And it's like this that we really change the world.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're speaking, I remember that at some point, I can't remember who, but a spiritual teacher, I think it was a white man spiritual teacher, was saying how we shouldn't use the word hope, and that hope takes us out of the present. And for me, hope is connected to vision. It's like you can see that something else is possible. and not only see it, but you know it in your cells, you know it in your bones, you know that it's possible. What is called hope is just a trust and a belief that that is possible. I recognize that there was a moment along my journey where I was like, oh no, must delete hope from vocabulary because I've been told this is not a good word. And yet it's such a natural thing. And if as humans we didn't have that capacity, how would we do anything? I mean, how could you go through a pregnancy or bring a child into the world or anything without a sense of hope of what might unfold for that child?
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's something in it as well. And again, it's fascinating if this was a man.
It definitely was a man. I just can't place who it was.
Yeah. Is that there is this necessary surrendering to the mystery, because ultimately we don't know what's going to happen. And that is one of the hardest things that the masculine mind has to accept. The feminine energetically has much more trust in the mystery, because she's always dancing on the edge of the void, the seen and the unseen. And, within our cycles across a month and across a lifetime, there's always that dance. And so hope absolutely holds that seed of, it might not happen, and it might. To always be super intentional, to always have this kind of like steadfast conviction that this is going to happen, this is the way. It's very like new age personal development, it's like you've got to like see it until you believe it, and then that's what's going to make it happen. And to some degree that is true, I believe. But there's also a surrender into the mystery that is just as powerful in our evolution as trying to will everything into existence.
Yeah, like the difference of when you can have the vision instead of like affirming the vision and just like pushing the vision forward, which a lot of the new age personal development is. I've been to those seminars. I've walked across fire. I've done all of it. But then when you're able to hold the vision, like you see the vision and then you let go of the vision and then you let things unfold and you keep things open, that something even more beautiful might appear, or a challenge that you haven't expected, but you'll learn and grow from it. It's a whole different skill, that one of surrender, of beautiful surrender.
Totally. And I was just, as you're saying that, I was thinking, imagine if we all had the exact same vision of the future. Imagine if everybody was like, okay, vision of the future, everybody's golden, everybody's smiling, everybody's really rich, everybody's trading everything they have, like the whole earth is golden, there's crystals everywhere, like people are channeling with crystals and using crystal power and magic, and we're creating new pyramids together. And amazing in some ways that would be. How much would that also take out the kind of the nuance and the magic of us all being different and us all being seeded on this planet to be a missing piece of a puzzle, with a vision which is very personal, but which is seeded in love and truth. It almost seems impossible for us to all have the same vision, for us all to walk in towards that vision. What feels more possible is the energy behind whatever we create in this world. And then we see what shows up in the field when everything is coming from a place of love. Then we get to be surprised by what shows up.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been asking people their visions of the future that they choose for over a decade now. No one has ever used the word golden in the way that you did, but there's something about the essence of what people share that is similar, even though it's different. It has different language, it has different story, it has a slightly different emphasis. But as humans, there's not too much to want that is like wildly diverse, because we do have the same evolutionary impulse and that same connection to spirit, to the sacred that runs through us all.
Totally. And that's sometimes how I feel that we close the gap between the haves and the have-nots, in inverted commas, where we understand that no matter the circumstance, there is an evolutionary impulse, a drive towards beauty and towards a beautiful future. And circumstances can obscure and can dampen that from our conscious awareness. And yet that drive and that impulse is still there within each of us. It's not biased. It's not biased to the people that are privileged. It's something that is flowing through us all. For those of us who are in a position to be able to really make moves on callings and longings of our soul, that's our prerogative, but also obligation, I sometimes feel.
And we don't really know exactly what privilege really is. I say that kind of remembering people that I know that have like immigrated from, say, India to the UK and just been like, never known this kind of separation and loneliness before. What happens when you know, everything's about having your own space and having your own walls and having your own everything, that you don't need people in the same way. And so there's all kinds of different ways of being wealthy that we don't even really understand yet.
Yeah. I think for me, whenever I use that word, it's the knowing that we have of being in some kind of advantageous position. And as you say, and I totally agree, it's very nuanced again. It looks different for different people, but there's a sense within ourselves. We know it. We know when we feel it. And it's not for somebody else to define. That's where this whole conversation around it gets quite tricky. Because while I understand that there are people who don't realize, perhaps, that they have experienced advantages in life which have given them a completely different experience, point fingers at people and just say, you are privileged, when in somebody's heart of hearts, for whatever reason, they don't always feel that way, isn't necessarily the most conducive to creating peace and unity on this planet. It has to be an exploration within that person. You can ignite that exploration through curiosity and through these kinds of conversations. But essentially for me, it's the feeling that we arrive at within ourselves, which in many ways should feel empowering as opposed to guilt activating, shame activating.
All humans suffer. That's part of being human, and also being in this imperfect world where the systems are designed in such a way. I'm curious about like these words, peace and unity, and how they can actually be part of this world.
Peace is that sense of acceptance and surrender to the knowing that we can create as human. And it's like our life's work, to be able to surrender into that depth of truth, that there's only so much, perhaps, that we can control. And whenever I tune into that, I get this really deep sense of relief these days. Like, okay, cool. I can do what I can do. And then there's some other things that are just beyond my immediate control. And then in terms of unity, what unity looks like on this planet, again, boils down to, first and foremost, the inner embrace, the inner unification of parts that have been fragmented over our lifetime. Through that integration, which may take more than one lifetime, but it's the process. It's not that I'm assuming that we will all be fully integrated one day, completely whole, perfect, you might say. It's more this sense that we are on a journey of piecing ourselves back together and remembering that home's always been this experience of love in the heart and feeling that as much as we possibly can, feeling love inside of ourselves. And then when we really feel love, when we really can almost experience more love moment to moment in every day that we're here than anything else, we start to create this, what people are calling this unity consciousness, which always begins within. There's no way around it. It has to start within. There's no avenue to trying to fix and change and unify things outside of ourselves when we're not integrated within ourselves. And again, it's not perfection that we're seeking, it's just a commitment to doing that.
So on a slightly related but different topic, you have been in a long-term conscious relationship for 15 years. A lot of people say right now that that's not possible. Monogamy is over and, it's all over. How have you and Felix been able to grow together?
First of all, in response to that monogamy is over narrative, I give one big fat yawn to that, because it's not true, and it's an unhealthy, for me, it's an unhealthy perspective to have. And it's unhealthy not because I'm against polyamory or whatever the alternative to monogamy is these days. There's so many different potentials. And there is a part of me that understands that the animal part of us seeks energetic dynamics between more than one person, you and many people. And yet we have developed this beautiful prefrontal cortex, which gives us the choice to evolve with one person at a time. In our relationship, we got together when we were 20, and we didn't know who we were as individuals then, really. We were still trying to figure ourselves out. So as you can imagine, that took us on a journey which was divergent at some points and then convergent. We have had to give ourselves the space and the time to really know who we are as individuals. Because for a long time we were enmeshed. I think they call it entangled these days, we're enmeshed in ways that maybe weren't so healthy. We were kind of becoming one in a way where the individual parts were distorted. And they always will be on some level, but it wasn't healthy. And so we had to learn to really, we've separated numerous times. We spent the best part of the year in 2011, I think it was, separate in 2 different countries, doing our own thing, exploring for ourselves who we were. So by that point, I think we've been together for 7 or 8 years, and we needed that time. That's not necessarily going to be the case for everybody, because remember, we were so young when we got together. If you're getting into a relationship and you've done a heck of a lot of work and you're in your mid-30s, heading towards your 40s, that might not be necessary to do. What is really important is that there is this continual respect and understanding for individuality within the communion that you're creating. And that looks like giving each other space. Quite simply put, it looks sometimes like understanding the design of the other person isn't the same as yours. It comes from understanding that there's power in polarity. I think there's a tendency sometimes, and I hear women saying to me all the time, I'm so different to my partner, it's not going to work, we're just so different, we're like complete opposites. And actually what people don't realize is that in a relationship that can be really, really healthy. And the opposite, because it creates chemistry, it creates electricity, which is what, if there's enough of a balance there, leads to a sustainable relationship long term. If you're both the same, again, I'm not saying that it can't work, but there's not enough friction sometimes to keep the fire blazing beneath that relationship. And I'm sure the people that are listening to that will understand those two dynamics. And so for us, we are very different in so many ways, but what is at the core of our relationship is love and values that are rooted in both evolving into truth together and separately, and to committing to creating a beautiful world for our community and beyond. So that's what has really helped to solidify our relationship, our millennial relationship, because it is a millennial relationship. I'm really proud of it, to be honest with you. We were pre-Tinder. We always talk about how, in many ways, lucky we are and how different it might have been if Tinder had been around, and we got together, because suddenly there's this kind of like instant gratification thing going on, and the ability to just shift like that and not commit and, want to do the work together. So I understand the challenge that many people are facing right now, but I also understand that, this narrative that there are men out there who only want one thing and women out there who want another is also false, because there are plenty of men looking for long-term, beautiful relationships. And equally, there are plenty of women who are looking for short, sharp, fiery connections. And there's obviously reasons for that. But we've got to be really careful not to create a story that's not going to serve the greater good.
Are there any specific rituals or kind of ways of communicating that you have developed in your relationship that you can share that could be a way of our friends listening finding that deeper connection with their partners, finding that deeper trust and allowing of who each one is within the union and separately?
Yeah. A really great practice for anybody who's kind of interested in this kind of thing is to look at charts, astrological charts, human design, gene keys. There's a way of having like a tangible. So rather than it always being like, I'm assuming that this is the kind of person that you are based on the behaviors that you're showing to me, it can be really helpful when somebody receives a kind of a more expansive look at who they are. And I know that not everybody is necessarily tuned into this kind of thing, but for me personally, it was this revelation of all the things that I knew to be true. And similarly for my partner as well, it was, oh yeah, this is my tendency, and this is my challenge, and this is my gift. And when you understand that as a couple, you can navigate it in ways which are much more easeful and graceful and tolerant and understanding. I always say, just don't sweat the small stuff. That's one of the biggest rituals, is to find as best as you can humor in the things that quite often are really minor. And I understand that is relative, but most of the things that blow up in relationships, when you really kind of get a magnifying glass to them, are minuscule. We celebrate an full moon, we have new moon practices and intentions, but beyond that, there is this ever-evolving understanding that we are different. We're not only different from quote-unquote gender perspective, but we're also different from an energetic perspective. And we're also different in terms of the way that we've been brought up. We're also different in terms of our sometimes perspectives in what's happening in the world, and that's okay. And it's teaching us again about tolerance, as long as it doesn't directly challenge a very deep core value that we have, which is where a lot of relationships do break up. You know, friends who've been in long-term relationships that broke up since last year because it became clear that they have very different views around rapes, for example. That's a core value. You know, your values around identity is huge, and if you don't agree on that, then it's going to be really hard for you to move forward together in a conscious way.
Thank you for sharing. I know that will inspire so many people listening that are going through various challenges with that part of their life, to remember that it's something that you have to show up for and celebrate as well as work at.
Yeah, and another thing that just came to mind as well is it's okay to take time apart. It's not necessarily always going to be a catalyst for the end. And not to generalize, but typically for women, there is a fear of spaciousness sometimes in relations. And again, I know that's not always true, but we've been programmed to be more attached to our partners. And what I've found is that can be very restrictive. When the partner is a man, that can be really restrictive for them in a relationship, because energetically, typically, there is a greater need for a man to feel like he has freedom. And I'm really conscious of not generalizing, but from my experience, when we can, as women, embrace time alone, particularly during our cycle, and we can articulate that I need time alone as well, particularly if we've got dependence and that kind of thing, it will only fuel a beautiful relationship, because our lives are so busy. And people started to realize during the pandemic, oh my God, I'm spending so much time. I've never spent so much time with my partner. This is crazy. I want to run away. Not because I don't love them, but they realize the need and the importance of having space. And then there's some people that it was just like the best thing ever, that they could finally spend all this time together. So it's trusting when your soul just needs to not be enmeshed in the energetic of another person. That might even look like sleeping in a different bed, God forbid. Oh my God. It's brave. Relationships are like the breeding ground of courage because you're forced to speak truth like you never have, or you're encouraged, given this opportunity to speak truth like you never have before. You're encouraged to do things differently, perhaps the way your parents did things. It's just all these points of growth and opportunities to be bold, to see yourself in your like ugliness in the reflection of somebody else, in your shadow. It's amazing. It's amazing.
As we're coming towards the end of our time together, what is the call to action that you'd like to share with our friends listening?
The call to action for me is turning the gaze inward more and more and more, as much as you possibly can. Acknowledging that outside of you, there is a lot of noise, there is a lot of chaos, and it demands our attention to a degree, but not more attention that we are giving to ourselves moment to moment. Committing to taking time out for ourselves, committing to connecting in. What is it that my soul wants right now? What is it that my heart is longing for right now? And can I allow that longing to carry me forward into a way that will eventually influence the greater good? And that looks like the inner mothering, the forgiveness, the compassion, the self-care, the aligned action towards the dreams that have been placed on our heart, not only for us, but for the greater good of the collective.
Thank you. And is there another call to action of something that, if that's, say, your inner call to action, do you have an outer call to action as well? Something that you can encourage our friends to support, donate to, show up for?
Yeah, the Love Land Foundation is something that I'm really aligned with at the moment. And I would always say, any external experience that you can have where you're giving some of what you have, some resource to some other thing that needs it, is enough. It could be a charity, it could be a person, a family, whatever. The act of giving from the overflow is enough. That's the call to action. The external call to action is that we're consistently in this rhythm of offering our resource to whatever calls us, to whatever is presented in our field that can benefit the good of even just an individual, if not on a bigger scale.
But what do you mean by it's enough?
It's enough to not have to give to a charity because you think that that's what you should do. It's enough you're enough giving what you have when you have it.
So it's enough. It's like a counterbalance of the narrative that we should, and that kind of being motivated by guilt and shame of privilege. And
yeah, there's still like a commitment. There's still a commitment to give, but I think the energy behind the giving is way more important than what it is that we do. Because some people give millions of pounds so that they can get a tax cut to a charity. Some people have an extra quid in their pocket that they can give to the big issue. The difference is in where is it coming from? Because that's where is it coming from is what we're building the world upon. We're not building the world upon the action, like the action in itself. We're building the world upon like the energy and the feeling behind the action. So 1 billion people giving a small amount in whatever way they can is much more impactful than 1,000 giving billions or millions or thousands to causes they don't really care about because it's just doing it. Because I'm not again saying that those people do that. I think there's definitely a need to siphon wealth around the planet, but nothing will change until we change. And so if your heart in doing that is in a misaligned place, then my question is always, how impactful will that get to be in the long run? It depends, I guess, what happens to that money when it gets into the hands of other people who will do good with it. It's doing what you can with what you have in the moment, for me, is the call to action. Understanding as well that when we do have more, that we can understand the impact that gets to have in the greater collective. It's stripping away that should out of any conversation, no matter how noble it is. I'm just not, I don't know, I find it challenging. You should be giving your money to this person or to this thing because you've got it. Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes and no.
Yeah, and if we're all more open in our hearts, it will be much clearer where to share resources and how to share resources and why. Dee, it's been beautiful to spend this time with you together, both of us on our respective beds, getting cozy. How would you like people to connect more with you? Can you share the links? And obviously we'll post links to everything that has been shared here today.
Thank you, my love. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always, having a convo with you. In terms of me and where I am, you can find me online. At the moment, I'm most active on Instagram. So Diahann Holder on Instagram. And then also I'm currently having a website built. So diahannholder.com will be up and running soon. But in the meantime, Instagram is where you can find me. Lots of content, ideas, musings, programs, retreats. You can find all the information there on the page.
Excellent. So everyone go to Dee's Instagram. If you're on the gram, you won't regret it as a place to hang out that's inspiring and upbeat. Thank you so much for this time and for your wisdom and for taking the call.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?